Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world most people wouldn't envy, even in their dreams. Not the thrones, not the crowns, not the grand castles, but the quiet shadows just behind them. The ones with heavy boots, aching backs, and eyes that rarely close. Because here's the thing, nobody really tells you being a medieval king's bodyguard wasn't about glory. It wasn't about loyalty or honor. It was about never blinking too long, never sitting too comfortably, and never forgetting that, even in bed, danger breathes louder than sleep. You probably imagine palace walls and velvet cloaks, but behind all that was a life of mud, suspicion, and a constant ache between your shoulders. There's a certain paradox to it. The closer you are to power, the faster it wears you down. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't guard a king because you want to sleep soundly. You do it because no one else dares to. And so you begin, maybe at 16, already taller than your brothers, already stronger than your father was by your age. The recruiters like that. They say you have shoulders fit for duty and a temper quiet enough to stand still. But nobody tells you what stillness really costs. It starts with standing guard outside his door. Sounds simple, until you realize the door's opened 15 times an hour, and each knock might be a noble, a mistress, a messenger, or a man with a dagger. The wooden handle feels smooth, worn down by your own sweat. You memorize every creak in the corridor, every reflection in the polished goblets down the hall. Because while the king snores, you're wide awake, ears twitching at the faintest shift in the wind. You learn quickly that sleep is not your right. It's a luxury doled out in shifts, stolen in snatches, and never truly restful. You dream of footsteps, and when you do sleep, it's often while sitting upright, helmet on lap, fingers still curled around your scabbard. You get good at pretending you didn't just nod off. There's a trick: breathe through your nose, keep your chin high, and if your knees buckle, blame the cold. The king will never say thank you. His gratitude is measured in the absence of punishment. If he passes you without a glare, that's a good day. If he doesn't remember your name, that's a blessing. Because when he does remember, it's usually to blame someone. And bodyguards are, well, very blamable. Historians still argue whether royal bodyguards were respected figures or expendable meat shields. And honestly, you can't blame them. The answer is probably both, depending on whether your king woke up cheerful or paranoid. You learn to listen to the king's voice the way farmers listen to thunder. Is it loud? Then run. Is it quiet? Then run faster. Is it gone? Then pray. There's a superstition among the guards that the first one to hear the king's yawn in the morning is cursed to be punished by sunset. You laugh it off until it happens to you. He yawns. You flinch. And by evening, you're assigned to clean the night chamber. You don't ask questions, you just obey. The other guards don't laugh, because they've all done their time. That's the thing, nobody escapes the stink jobs. Not even the captain of the guard. He may get the best boots and a room without rats, but he's still the one who has to explain to the king why the soup was too cold. And explaining things to a man who wears a bejeweled crown but doesn't know how to use a spoon without help is delicate. Remember, this is a man who could have you executed for interrupting his afternoon nap, or worse, reassigned to watch his least favorite cousin on a hunting trip. Those cousins are always the most suspicious, always asking too many questions, always carrying crossbows pointed a little too low. And while you're pretending to enjoy venison and cold nights, the king's back home, bathing in goat milk and complaining that no one scratches his shoulder blades just right. There's a kind of irony there. The man you'd die to protect might not remember you tomorrow, but you remember him every word, every cough, every glance that could have meant death. The older guards call it silent memorization. You start counting how many times he clears his throat during dinner. You learn the way he rubs his temples before announcing a new tax. You even learn to interpret the angle of his elbows during chess, because if he loses, you might be sent to scrub the stables. And that's not a joke. Last spring, one of the guards chuckled when the queen won a match. That same guard was reassigned to carry manure from sunrise to moonrise for 6 days. The queen never acknowledged him again, not with a smile, not with a nod, Just silence. Maybe that's the most exhausting part, the silence. It stretches between you and the king, between you and the other guards, between you and your former life. You start to forget what birds sound like. You get nervous around flowers. You look at the sky and wonder if it's allowed. And it gets in your bones the knowledge that you're never really off duty, not even during meals, not even when you're pretending to sleep, because anyone might try something, and you, for all your training, for all your resolve, are still just a man. You're not invincible. You're just visible, always visible. And that means you're the first one they'll test if someone wants to send a message. So you stand, you yawn when no one's watching. You scratch your back against the stone wall and imagine you're elsewhere, but you're not. You're here, with aching feet, with that clunky armor, and with a sword that's polished more than drawn, and with a king who may not know your name but certainly owns your life. The armor looks impressive in paintings, all gleam and grandeur, a walking monument of loyalty with steel-plated pride. But no one ever paints the smell, or the itch, or the way the sweat pools behind your knees and soaks your linen underclothes before sunrise. That suit of shining armor, it's not yours. First of all, it belongs to the royal armory, and you share it with two other guards whose hygiene is, let's say, historic. You try not to think about who wore it last, but when your shoulder sticks to the inner lining with a wet slap, you can't help it. They say you're lucky to have armor at all. Most soldiers in the king's army still fight in boiled leather and pray it doesn't rain. But for bodyguards, the armor is ceremonial and compulsory, even indoors. You clank like a pot cupboard every time you move. Try standing silently in a candlelit corridor while your shoulder plates squeal with each breath. You develop a special shuffle just to stay quiet, a kind of iron-legged glide, knees slightly bent, chin tucked down, like you're impersonating a very nervous turtle. It works mostly until the new guy from the western barracks decides to polish your cuirass with ox grease. You slip halfway down the spiral staircase and chip your elbow. The royal physician wraps it in linen soaked in vinegar and mutters about balance of humors. You nod politely while planning his demise. But pain is normal. Everyone's always in some degree of pain. You just don't mention it unless it affects your sword grip. Speaking of swords, yours weighs nearly 5 pounds. Not terrible, until you've held it in your left hand for 4 hours straight while standing by the king's dining chair. Your fingers go numb around the hilt. You pretend you're meditating. In reality, you're wondering if you'll ever play the lute again. The joints of the armor rust from the inside out. You're supposed to oil them every evening, but there's never time. You scrape dried mud off your greaves with the edge of your dagger. The mud came from the palace garden, which is off limits, but no one ever checks. It's your one moment of rebellion dragging your feet through the soft dirt like a child. Of course, you pay for it. The king's dog, a pug-faced creature named Hrothgar, follows your muddy footprints back to the barracks. The head steward chews you out in front of everyone. He says, "You dishonor the floor." You don't respond. You just keep polishing. Historians still argue whether medieval bodyguards had access to personal bathing quarters, but if they did, yours was surely built by a sadist. It's a wooden tub, tucked in the corner of a stone basement, filled once a week by kitchen boys who may or may not spit in it. You bathe quickly, always quickly, because the moment you close your eyes, you risk falling asleep and drowning in 6 inches of tepid water. You once knew a man who did just that, slipped under with a sigh and didn't come back up. He was replaced before sunset, no ceremony, no mention, just a new face in the hallway the next morning. You nodded, he nodded. Neither of you asked names. The helmet is the worst part. Heavy, always slightly too big or too small. It flattens your nose and echoes every heartbeat. When the visor's down, you can barely see. When it's up, the light blinds you. You've learned to squint through the slits and angle your chin like a hawk surveying prey. Of course, you haven't hunted in years. Bodyguards don't get leisure. No forests, no fishing, no falcons. You eat salted meat and pickled onions. You chew slowly to avoid dreaming of fresh pears. One time, during a rare moment off duty, you sneak into the kitchen and steal an apple. It's overripe and bruised, but sweet enough to bring tears. You eat it under the stairs. The pastry cook sees you and says nothing. She's missing 3 teeth and understands more about war than most knights. Her silence is a gift. Later, when the captain of the guard finds the apple core, he calls an emergency inspection. You spend the evening lined up in the courtyard, armor off, shirtless in the rain while he searches your bunks. You get sick. You don't complain. Complaining means weakness, and weakness means demotion, or worse, special duty, which often involves holding a torch near the queen's dressing room while pretending not to hear anything. You tell yourself it builds character. Mostly it just builds resentment. Still, you polish your boots, you oil your scabbard, you bow when you're supposed to and speak only when addressed. The armor squeaks, your shoulders ache, your thighs bruise where the plates pinch. But you show up, always, because showing up is survival. There's a quiet rule among the guards: those who disappear weren't late. They were merely absent at the wrong moment. You sleep with one eye open, even when you're not on duty. You wear your boots to bed. You start dreaming in gray. Once, a noble asks if he can try on your helmet. You say no. He laughs. The king doesn't. You're punished. Not severely. Just an extra week on night perch. That's what they call the guard post above the north tower. Windy, lonely, and so cold your eyelashes freeze. You count the hours by the drip of condensation from the stone arch above you. At dawn, your lips are blue. You smile anyway, because you're still here, still breathing, still armored, still invisible. That's your true job. After all, not just protecting the king, but disappearing beside him, becoming part of the wall, a shadow with a sword, a helmet that blinks. And when someone does try something, when a cupbearer spills wine just a little too nervously, when a guest kneels a little too slowly, when the air shifts and everyone forgets how to breathe, you don't think, you just move, you block, you shield, you absorb, and then you wait. For praise, no. For survival. Because if you move too quickly, you're suspicious. Too slowly, you're incompetent. Just right. You're forgettable. And in this job, forgettable is the goal. Better to be a ghost in armor than a name in a grave. The king doesn't sleep well, and neither do you. His dreams are full of omens, his bed of furs and silk, and his nights long, erratic, and often interrupted by groans, sudden commands, or the shrill barks of his awful little pug. You, standing like a statue outside his chamber door, hear all of it, every midnight shuffle, every panicked whisper to the royal physician, every creaking floorboard as a servant tiptoes in to check the fire. You learn to decode the night by sound alone. A whimper means his back hurts. A snore means you get 10 more seconds of stillness. And silence. Silence is the worst. Silence means something's wrong. And when something's wrong, it usually lands on your shoulders. One guard was once demoted for not noticing that the king had accidentally rolled off the edge of his enormous mattress. His Majesty wasn't injured, just embarrassed. But embarrassment is the deadliest sin in court. The guard was sent to the kitchens, not to guard them, to peel onions, for 8 months. So now, you watch, you listen, you learn how to anticipate every mood before it arrives. Is the king sighing more than usual? Expect an early morning ride. Are his boots louder today? He's angry. Someone's getting beheaded. Is he humming? That means nothing. He hums when plotting taxes. Historians still argue whether kings in the high medieval period were truly as volatile as chroniclers claim, or whether those stories were exaggerated by bitter servants. But you know firsthand, moods rule kingdoms. And if the king has a bad one, your fate could change with the flick of a hand. The truth is, he's lonely, powerful, yes, feared, always, but lonely beyond measure. And you're close, too close, close enough to be mistaken for a friend, or worse, a spy. So you keep your head down, you speak softly, and when the king turns to you and asks, "Do you think they all hate me?" you answer without thinking, "No, Your Grace, anything else is treason. Of course, they all do hate him. But hatred is a privilege reserved for distance. You don't get to feel hatred. You're too busy staying alive. Once, the king has a nightmare about his brother drowning. He wakes up screaming, throws his goblet at the wall, and blames the guard outside his door. That's you. You didn't drown his brother. His brother isn't even dead. But logic doesn't matter at 2 in the morning. You're sent to the stables, you clean hooves, it smells like moldy hay and wet fur. You hold your breath for hours. You learn not to curse under it. The horses become your only audience. You start to talk to them. They don't respond, which is somehow comforting. They never ask about court politics. They don't care about inheritance law or border disputes or the Duchess's new hat. You grow fond of them. One has a crooked ear and a habit of sneezing on you during grooming. You name him Justice. You never tell anyone. If the king hears you've named a horse, he might laugh or order it slaughtered, just to remind you who names things here. Back in the castle, the job only tightens its grip. You rotate duties, throne room, banquet hall, bedchamber, garden walks, and once a week, the worst post-latrine escort. That's right. You stand outside the king's personal privy while he grunts like a wounded ox and demands someone sing to drown the shameful noise. Guess who sings you? Badly. On purpose. It becomes a competition among the guards who can sing the most ridiculous tune with the straightest face. You once did an entire verse about a dancing cow. The king found it amusing. You weren't punished. A rare win. But humor is a thin rope to walk. Make him laugh too much, and he grows suspicious. Make him frown, and you're marked, so you balance between jest and silence. A smirk here, a nod there, a half bow that implies both humility and shared absurdity. You become fluent in nonverbal survival. The worst shift, though, isn't the latrine. It's the evening patrols through the upper halls, because that's when the nobles whisper. They stroll arm in arm, laughing too loudly. Their words are like poisoned honey. You can't react. You just stand, a warm body in cold armor, while they debate whether you're even human. One once poked your chest plate with a fan and said, "I wonder if it has thoughts." You didn't flinch. That was the game. They test your silence. They test your fear, and you win only by never reacting. But you do think, always. You think about your family, the village you left, the dog you used to feed crust behind the mill. You wonder if your father still checks the road at sunset, hoping to see you. He won't. You're not allowed to write letters. Bodyguards keep no paper. Not because of tradition, but because parchment leaks secrets, and secrets kill kings. Or worse. Get you reassigned to perimeter silence. That's the phrase for being posted just beyond the outermost gate, in a field of nettles, guarding nobody from nothing. It's exile without travel. One man did that for 3 years before vanishing entirely. They said he ran. More likely, he just dissolved into the fog. You think about him, sometimes. When your watch is long and the torches burn low, you wonder how many men vanish this way quietly, forgettably, dutifully. Their stories unwritten, their service undocumented. That's why you don't romanticize the job. You know better. Behind the velvet curtains and heraldic banners, there's just a rotating cast of frightened men in loud armor, pretending they're invisible. You've learned to love invisibility. It's safer than being noticed. At court, attention is currency, and you're always broke, so you avoid eye contact. You bow too much. You cough to signal your presence, but not your opinion. You are the shadow, the echo, the steel that moves when summoned, and vanishes when dismissed. And when the king paces late into the night, muttering about enemies you've never seen and alliances you don't understand, you nod, always nod. That's what he wants. Agreement, without burden, loyalty, without personhood. And when he finally sleeps fitful, tangled in linen and fear, you remain, standing, listening, not because you believe in him, not because you love your station, but because the alternative is to leave. And leaving means becoming no one, becoming another ghost who once stood beside a crown and dared to blink. You and 3 others share the night watch rotation. 4 shadows for 1 man who sleeps like a hunted deer and wakes like a tyrant. The shift schedule sounds fair on paper, 3 hours on, 6 off. Rotated weekly, but paper lies. Reality means covering for the guy who got food poisoning from undercooked pheasant, or taking extra turns because someone else accidentally overslept in the barracks. The penalty for failure isn't a fine, it's suspicion. And in court, suspicion spreads faster than plague. You learn to count hours not by bells, but by torch melt. A quarter candle means it's still early, a half-melted one, and you're late. But time stretches strangely at night. Minutes feel like hours. Your eyes burn, your legs twitch. You shift weight from one foot to the other so often it becomes a kind of slow dance. Clank, right, sigh, clank left. And all the while, you're surrounded by men who would probably trade you for an extra blanket and a boiled egg. Not because they hate you, but because they're just as tired, just as worn, just as loyal to the idea of surviving one more week. You don't talk much. Words are expensive. Conversations happen in glances, shoulder nudges, the way someone tightens their belt or sighs too sharply before a shift change. You can tell who's losing it by the way they blink. Too slow means they're thinking about home. Too fast means they're not thinking at all. A good guard blinks like a cat, calculated, unbothered, ancient. The best of you can sleep standing up, eyes half open, hand on hilt. Not real sleep, but something like it. A trance that leaves you just alert enough to hear a footstep in the wrong place. One night, one of the younger guards nods off too hard. The king's fool sneaks by and ties a chicken to his belt. When the captain sees it, he doesn't laugh. He assigns the boy to privy duty again. That's the unofficial punishment for everything. Historians still argue whether royal fools were allowed to interfere with court guards, or if that was just romantic exaggeration from minstrels. But you know the fool is untouchable. He says what no one else can say. He acts without fear. You envy him sometimes. He dances on the edge while you're nailed to duty. He plays with danger while you polish your sword and pretend the noise in the corridor is just rats. That's another thing, the rats. Always there. Bold little things. They stare at you from beneath banners and thrones. Sometimes you swear they wink. You've started naming them. One's called Gerard. Another, Tooth. You don't tell anyone. Talking to rats is a step toward madness. And madness gets you reassigned to the alchemist's chamber, boiling mercury fumes and goat horn powder until your brain softens. Your shift partner is a man named Rolf. He's missing half an ear, has a cough that never leaves, and walks like one leg shorter than the other. But he never misses a detail. He can smell a lie through an oak door. You've grown to trust him, even if you'd never say it aloud. Trust is dangerous. Trust implies alliance. Alliance implies intention, and intention gets noticed. Still, when Ralph taps the hilt of his sword twice before leaving his post, you tap back. It's your one ritual, a fragile thread of recognition in a world where most people would let you die in a heartbeat if it meant rising one rung higher. The hours before dawn are the worst. The castle falls into an uncanny silence. Even the torches seem to flicker more quietly. Your breath feels louder. You imagine the king snoring in his bed, blankets twisted, dreams crowded by paranoia and half-remembered insults. You wonder what it's like to sleep that deeply. Then you remember he doesn't. His dreams wake him. His guilt wakes him. And on those rare nights when he doesn't scream or toss, he rises early, bursting from his chamber like a startled rooster and demanding someone read the book of Psalms while he relieves himself. That someone is often you. You're handed a holy text, told to make it dramatic, and expected to deliver sacred verses while the king grunts behind a silk curtain. One time, you read a passage about divine justice and he shouted, "Skip ahead, I don't like that part." You skipped. You skipped so hard you accidentally read from a list of chamber inventory. He didn't notice, called it inspiring. The other guards laughed about it for days, quietly, behind stone pillars. These small victories are everything. They are the oxygen of the job, the brief moments where absurdity overtakes terror, and everyone remembers that this life is, frankly, ridiculous. One guard used to recite love poetry to the firewood while on shift. When asked why, he said, "The logs complain less than nobles." You miss him. He disappeared last winter. No one talks about it. That's how it goes. Disappearances are never discussed. If you ask, you're suspicious. If you notice too much, you're disloyal. If you care, you're weak. So you don't ask. You just nod when the captain says someone took ill. You nod again when a replacement shows up the next day. A new set of boots in the same formation. A new face to memorize, to not befriend, to maybe carry if he collapses during procession. because collapsing is common, especially during court ceremonies. The heat, the armor, the tension, it all builds. You've fainted twice. Once, you hit your knee and it hasn't bent the same since. You walk with a slight limp now. It's manageable. You disguise it by adjusting your stride on stairs. You've practiced. At night, you rub vinegar into the joint and tell yourself it's healing. It isn't, but belief is part of the job too. You believe you'll make it through the next week. You believe the king might forget you exist. That's the best case. Because the moment he remembers your name, your luck turns. A remembered guard is a useful guard. A useful guard gets noticed, and noticed men in court are either promoted or buried. You've seen both. The man who caught an assassin's blade mid-swing was knighted, then sent to the front lines 2 weeks later. Died in a skirmish no one recorded. The man who spotted poison in the queen's tea was praised, then accused of planting it, vanished. They say he lives in the marshes now, dressed as a monk. You hope that's true. You like the idea of someone escaping, of someone trading duty for silence, armor for moss. You imagine it sometimes, not running away, just walking, slowly, into the trees, letting the weight fall from your shoulders like a dropped pail. But for now, you stay. You watch. You walk the halls with 3 other tired men, none of whom would save you if the roof collapsed, but all of whom would carry your body back down the stairs, armor and all, and lay it at the chapel door like they were laying down a coat, because even in this tired, sour brotherhood, there's still a kind of respect. It's not kindness, but it's close enough. It's one of those nights where your body forgets what rest feels like. The king is restless again, pacing the upper chamber with the same heavy boots he insists on wearing indoors. You can hear him mumbling about Omen's crows on the battlements, a cracked goblet, the way the moon looked too round at supper. None of it makes sense, but you don't need it to. You just need to stand there, motionless, your fingers numb on the hilt of your sheathed sword. The hall smells like tallow, sweat, and burnt rosemary, the court alchemist's latest attempt to purify the air. It just makes your nose itch. You can't sneeze. Sneezing while the king is in one of his moods is a punishable offense. You've seen it. A guard once let out a cough during a royal sermon, and the bishop declared him possessed by disrespect. He was reassigned to the rookery, where he was pecked by crows for a month before losing a toe. So now you hold it in. Everything in. Always in. Your breath, your thoughts, your pain. Being a bodyguard means becoming a container, not just of steel, but of silence. The king finally sits, letting out a long sigh that means he's exhausted enough to stop talking, but not enough to sleep. You wait. 3 steps behind, diagonal right. That's your assigned spot tonight. Every few days, the captain changes it, says it's for tactical variation, but you know it's just to break any sense of pattern. Patterns are dangerous. They give the illusion of safety, and in the palace, safety is an illusion you can't afford to believe in. Just like friendship, you've stopped using names for most people. The steward is Stoop Nose. The treasurer is Lard Cuff. The queen's cousin is Too Many Teeth. It's easier this way. Names imply a future, a connection, a recognition that this person might outlast your next breath. Better to treat them like shadows identifiable only by shape, smell, or the sound of their particular footsteps. You've memorized those sounds, of course. Everyone has a cadence. The Duchess glides, the fool skips, the king stomps, and then there are the ones who whisper, their presence hinted only by the rustle of silk or the faint scent of oil of clove. Those are the dangerous ones. They move without weight. They speak with smiles that never reach their eyes. You hate them, but you never show it. Hate is a luxury, too, one you can't afford. Historians still debate whether the royal inner circles in medieval courts were truly as venomous as the letters and scrolls suggest, or whether later chroniclers simply embellished to spice up the record. But when you've stood guard during 6 silent feasts and 2 screaming matches over who miscounted a dowry chest, you stop wondering. It's venomous enough. The king calls for mulled wine. You signal the page. He scurries away like a frightened squirrel, returns with a golden cup on a silver tray, and bows so deeply he nearly tips it. You take the cup and pass it to the king. This is the part where your stomach tightens. Because poison is always a possibility. Every sip he takes could be the last. And if it is, guess who's first under suspicion? Not the cook, not the page. You, the man who handed it over. You didn't make it. You didn't test it. But you touched it. And touch, in court, is complicity. So you watch. You breathe. You pray not for the king's health, but for your own. You don't want him to die. Not while you're on shift. Let someone else carry that burden. Let someone else explain why his lips turn blue. He drinks, swallows, frowns, too much clove. He mutters, you nod. He forgets you exist again. Relief tastes like iron on your tongue. You shift your weight. Left foot now. The other's starting to go numb. You flex your toes in your boot, but it barely helps. Your socks are damp again. You think about taking them off, but then remember what happened to the last man who got caught airing his feet near the hearth. The queen walked in, said the smell gave her a headache. He was fined a month's wages and sent to polish every chandelier in the East Wing. You didn't even know there were chandeliers in the East Wing. Now you do. You've seen them. Cleaned one yourself once. After a different indiscretion, you were accused of smiling at the princess. You weren't. You were sneezing. But no one cares about accuracy in court. They care about perception, and perception is your worst enemy. The king leans back, eyes fluttering. He might nap soon. Not true sleep, he hasn't done that in years, but the fragile, twitching kind where his jaw loosens and he mumbles about the silver dog. You don't ask what it means. You just watch. You always watch. That's the job. Watching the door, the king, the shadows, your own trembling hand. It trembles sometimes now, not out of fear, but fatigue. Your sword feels heavier every week. You tried training left-handed once, to split the burden. It didn't go well. Your left hand is a traitor. Weak, indecisive, always cramping at the wrong moment. You've stopped trying. You just accept the ache. The ache is your companion, your armor, your badge. Once, a new recruit asked you if guarding the king ever feels meaningful. You stared at him for a long time before saying, "Sometimes I think he'd sleep better without us." You don't think he understood, but it felt good to say, even if it was a lie. The king wouldn't sleep better. He wouldn't sleep at all. He needs the illusion of safety. Just like you need the illusion of purpose, it's all you have. That, and the way the torchlight catches on the brass filigree of your scabbard when no one's looking. Small things, quiet things, things no one praises but you carry anyway. Ralph once said the king's guards are like teeth only noticed when they're missing. He was half drunk when he said it, hunched over a cup of fermented honey mead that tasted like old fruit and regret. But it stuck with you. Teeth, replaceable, expected, hidden behind a smile that rarely bites. The king stirs, his eyes open. You straighten. His gaze flicks toward you, lingers for a second, then slides away. You were almost seen, almost, but not quite. You exhale quietly and prepare for the next hour. It will be long. They always are. You wonder if dawn will come like it always does, burning away the chill and softening the world to something that almost feels human again. Maybe, but not yet. They call it tasting, but it's really more like gambling with your intestines. You'd think the most dangerous part of being a royal bodyguard would be the blades, the ambushes, the assassins hidden in tapestries. But no, it's dinner. Every evening, a handful of dishes are paraded in front of you before reaching the king's table. Your job, sample them. Just a bite, a sip, maybe hold the cup to your lips long enough to let the liquid kiss your tongue, just in case someone laced the wine with belladonna or ground glass. You're not supposed to swallow, but sometimes you do. Not because you want to, because you're hungry. Because you skipped breakfast, guarding a door that never opened. Because your last meal was crusty bread and something that might have once been cheese. And sometimes, poisoners wait for just that a moment of exhaustion. A bite too big. A delay in your spit. You've vomited 3 times this month. Once from something spoiled, once from something spicy, and once because your nerves got the better of you. You've learned how to make yourself throw up quietly. behind a column, before the king notices. He doesn't like noise at dinner, thinks it stirs the shadows. Historians still argue whether medieval poison testing was performed by official tasters, low-ranking servants, or guards like you. The answer is yes, all of the above, depending on who the king distrusted most that week. Last week, he doubted the cook. The week before, the wine steward. This week, apparently, it's you. So you taste, you chew slowly, you hold the morsel in your mouth while your stomach clenches and your heart imagines a future without beating. It's usually fine, but usually doesn't mean anything to a man who once saw a duke foam at the mouth from almond tarts. Almonds. Imagine fearing dessert. That's your life now. You don't eat for pleasure. You eat with your eyebrows raised and your fingers near your throat. Your digestion is no longer private. It's part of the security protocol. One evening, someone serves trout. Smells off. Looks fine. You glance at Rolf. He shrugs. You eat a sliver. Nothing. 20 minutes later, your vision blurs and your ears ring like cathedral bells. The kitchen blames a bad cask of vinegar. The king doesn't care. He's already halfway through a pear compote and complaining about the music. You're dismissed from dinner duty, told to rest until your color returns. You lie down in the servants' corridor, still armored, your tongue dry, your pulse furious. That night, the queen asks who approved the fish. No one answers. The steward goes missing. They say he returned to his family estate. You don't ask which direction he went, because you know, once someone's sent away, they never come back through the front gate. Maybe they wash ashore near a fishing village. Maybe they join a monastery and forget how to speak. Either way, they're gone. You survive. Again. And the next day, you're back at it. You taste, you nod. You pretend the bile in your throat is confidence. The worst part is the wine. Royal wine is never just grapes. There's always something added spices, tree bark, flower essence, things that make your tongue tingle, or your breath smell like roses. Half the time you can't tell if you're woozy from poison or fashion. One guard kept a notebook of symptoms: dizziness equals clove. Numb lips mean hemlock. Itchy scalp means probably just lice. The book vanished when he did. Now. The joke is that someone else is using it, writing your symptoms in real time. You laugh, but only with your eyes, because laughter draws attention, and attention invites questions, and questions in court are just blades in different clothes. You develop rituals, tiny gestures before you taste. Tap the rim of the goblet twice. Hum under your breath. Scratch your wrist. They don't ward off poison. They just make you feel like you're not totally helpless, like you're part of the game, even if you're just one of the pawns. Once, during a feast for a visiting ambassador, you're asked to taste a dish of quail stuffed with prunes. You hate prunes, but you eat, you chew, you smile, you survive. The ambassador does not, collapses halfway through a toast. Everyone freezes, except the king. He calmly sips his wine and mutters, "Should have used local poultry." That night, the entire kitchen staff is locked in the cellar. One never reemerges. You watch it unfold with the same detached curiosity you might offer a thunderstorm. It's happening, it's dangerous, but it's not happening to you yet. Until it is. You're summoned by name. That's never good. The king wants to see the brave man who eats death for me. You kneel. He praises your loyalty. He offers a coin, gold. You take it, bow, and leave. The next morning, it's gone from your bunk. No explanation. Just missing. Ralph says, "Better the coin than your head." He's right. Praise is a curse. You prefer anonymity. That evening, you taste duck. It's perfect, rich, warm, tangy with orange glaze. For a moment, you forget the fear. You even savor it. That's your mistake. Later, you're called aside. The king noticed, said. He smiled while chewing, too fond of his task. You're reassigned to torch duty. 8 hours of standing beside a flame that sings your eyebrows and makes your eyes weep. A reminder joy is suspicious. You return to tasting with a new face, one of stone. No expression, no pleasure, just duty. The same bite every time, like chewing paper. Some guards pray before they eat. Others drink blessed water. You just breathe, slow, even mechanical. You've trained your jaw to open without emotion, your throat to accept anything, even lies, especially lies. They go down smoother than duck. You learn which ingredients make the king paranoid. Cinnamon, a merchant's trick. Sage reminds me of my brother. Anything purple, too decadent. You report these trends to no one. You just adjust. Tasting becomes performance. You're not just protecting his body, you're shaping his mood. If the wine pleases him, the day ends peacefully. If it tastes ambitious, he might summon an executioner. The cook once said that cooking for the king is like painting with gunpowder. You now understand. You're the flint, the spark, and if you light the wrong dish, the whole court burns. It's not fair. It's not glorious. But it's the job. You, the walking appetite, the sacrificial stomach, the professional almost poisoned. You dream of simpler meals now. Bread and honey, cold apples, a bowl of broth untouched by politics. But those dreams are like fresh air noticed only by their absence. You wake up hungry and scared. Every time, and still, you taste. You never expected the bathroom to be part of your job, but here you are watching the king relieve himself while pretending the floorboards are fascinating. It's not just once a day either. It's after every meal, every anxiety attack, and sometimes in the middle of the night because he had a dream about drowning and now refuses to go alone. Your official duty, as written in some dusty parchment somewhere, is proximity security, but among the guards, you're just the piss post. That's what they call it. Royal Chamber Pot Escort. You stand exactly 4 feet from the door, no closer, no farther. You don't turn your head. You don't cough. You especially don't flinch when you hear what sounds like a goat giving birth behind that velvet curtain. Once, the queen's cousin tried to make you laugh by mimicking the royal grunts. You didn't, not because it wasn't funny it was, but because you knew the chamber walls echoed. Sound travels, and jokes get people flogged. So now you just breathe through your mouth and count seconds. 57 for a light wine day. 120 if he's had lamb. You know these numbers better than your own age. You probably won't forget them, even if you live to retire, which no one really does. Historians still argue whether royal hygiene was a matter of ritual or mere discomfort mitigation. You don't care. You're the one guarding the throne behind the throne, and it stinks. Literally. The royal chamber pot is gold-plated, sure, but that doesn't make the contents any less human. Your nose has adjusted over time. You've developed what Ralph calls selective smelling, a mental block that filters out offense. It only works half the time. The rest of the time, you chew mint leaves and pray for wind. The worst part isn't the smell, though. It's the eye contact, because sometimes the king talks to you while he's mid-process, as if your job includes counseling him through existential dread while he defecates. "Do you think they respect me?" he asks once, voice strained and echoing. "Of course, Your Majesty." You reply. You don't believe it. No one does. But lies flow easier in rooms like this. At least the acoustics are good. He once asked if you ever think about becoming a priest. You said no. He seemed disappointed. "Men of faith don't plot," he muttered. You made a note of that. A few weeks later, one of the royal confessors vanished. You connected the dots silently. That's what bodyguards do best. Stay silent while the world rearranges itself. Outside the privy, servants rush by with cloths, powders, oils, and scented herbs. They act like the king is sacred and his leavings are relics. You wonder if they whisper prayers over the pot. One of the younger pages once dropped it. Not on purpose, just a slip of the hand. The resulting mess sent half the staff into a frenzy, and the page was sent to the mines. The actual mines, as in underground. Pickaxe. Darkness. You wonder if he made it out. Probably not. Foul omens. The astrologer had said, "The king's waist must not touch stone." You think about that sentence often. Sometimes in horror. Sometimes in awe. It's the kind of thing only the powerful can say with a straight face. And the thing is, it worked. No more drop pots since. Fear works better than rules. Always has. And you, You're the face of that fear, not because you're fierce, but because you're always there, unblinking, watching, waiting, listening to every gurgle, every suspicious fart, every insecure confession cloaked in metaphor, the rats under the walls. He says one day, eyes distant, "Do you hear them too?" You say yes. You don't. You hear your heartbeat. You hear your armor creak when you shift your weight from foot to foot. You hear your life wasting away in a room designed for bodily relief. Once, a noble mocked you for your post, called you Lord of the Loos. You didn't react. But later, that same noble stumbled drunk into the armory and knocked over a display of ceremonial spears. Guess who reported it anonymously? He was sent to the outer holdings for spiritual reflection. You call that cosmic justice, or maybe just petty satisfaction. Either way, you win. The king's privy habits are, in their own way, a study in power. Some days he holds court from the seat itself, barking orders through the curtain while attendants scribble notes. Other days, he sits in silence for an hour and emerges claiming divine visions. Once, he insisted that the placement of the chamber pot affected his political clarity. The steward had to reorder all furniture in the adjacent hallway. That meant you stood by a different tapestry for a week. That tapestry smelled of mildew. You got a rash. You didn't complain. Complaining gets you reassigned, and reassignment, paradoxically, is worse, because then you have to train a replacement, and training means talking, and talking means trust, and trust gets you killed. So you endure. You learn to count the king's bowel movements like tides. You know which foods affect him fastest. You know that if he hasn't gone by midday, his temper becomes biblical. You know that if he emerges smiling, it means he's planning a feast. If he frowns, it means taxes. If he doesn't look at you, it means trouble. One day, he looks at you too long. You never ask questions. He says, "That's why I like you." You nod. You want to say, "I don't like you," but you smile instead. A soft, neutral smile. The kind you practice in the mirror when no one's around. The kind that means nothing and everything. A survival smile. Later, you find a letter under your bunk. No name, just an order. Stay quiet. He trusts you. Don't ruin it. You burn it. You don't know who sent it. Maybe the spy master. Maybe the queen. Maybe no one. Maybe it's a test. Everything is, you pass, because you're still here, still upright, still posted at the one door that no one wants to guard, but everyone wants to control. You joke sometimes, quietly, with Ralph that if the king ever dies mid-squat, history will remember the man who handed him the fig leaves. But it won't. History doesn't remember you. It doesn't remember who stood behind the curtain, only who pulled it back. So you don't hope for legacy. You hope for clean air, for dry boots, for a shift that ends without incident. You hope for stillness, even in a room built on noise. And when the king finally finishes, after groaning and sighing and declaring he's purged the demons of supper, you bow. You take the gold-handled pot from the servant and nod like you're being entrusted with a sacred vessel. Then you walk away, slowly, carefully, like carrying something holy. And for a strange, absurd moment, you almost believe it is. You stand by the fire at the edge of the great hall. Not for warmth, your armor blocks most of it, but because that's where the food enters during banquets. Your post is ceremonial, they say, a token of strength. But what they don't say is that it's also a trap. Because in the court of a medieval king, the banquet is not a celebration. It's a battlefield dressed in roast pheasant and honeyed mead. You're not watching the food. You're watching the hands near it. The eyes that linger too long on the carving knives. The guests who smile too wide, drink too slow, sit too still. Every nobleman is a suspect. Every servant is a liability. Every toast could be your last. The king sits at the high table beneath banners that have seen better decades. His crown reflects the candlelight like a flickering omen. He waves to his subjects, but his eyes never settle. He trusts no one. That's why you're here, not to be seen, but to see, and to be very, very quick if someone decides tonight is the night the dynasty ends with dessert. The hall smells like roasted fat, wilted flowers, spilt wine, and fear. You've learned to distinguish them all. Especially fear. It has a sweetness to it, like spoiled fruit. You recognize it immediately when a bard stumbles over a line in a song. The king pauses his chewing. You shift your stance. Just a half step, a gentle repositioning that puts your hand closer to your sword without drawing attention. The moment passes. The bard corrects himself. The king snorts and keeps eating. But your pulse doesn't slow for another 20 heartbeats. Banquets always run long, longer than necessary. That's part of the design. Keep the guests full, drunk, distracted. A full stomach is less likely to start a coup. But that doesn't mean the danger fades. It means it ferments. Behind every compliment is a calculation. Behind every joke, a jab. You see it in the way lords raise their cups toward the king and glance sideways at the duke who was passed over for promotion. You see it in the way the queen fingers her necklace when her cousin is seated too close. You see it in the way the food tasters wipe their lips between bites, as if already tasting regret. You don't eat at these banquets. Of course, you stand. You nod. You occasionally step forward if someone gets too animated near the king's table. But mostly, you exist. A presence, a deterrent, a reminder that while bread is broken and alliances are toasted, a blade is never far. Once, during a winter feast, a baron's hand slipped under the table. The king noticed. So did you. No one spoke, but the next day, that baron was sent to patrol the coastal marshes. In January, he returned 6 fingers lighter and half a mind gone. He never attended another feast. Historians still argue whether court banquets were truly as politically charged as some accounts suggest. You don't argue, you live them. You know that every goblet raised is a dice throw. Every laugh is a calculated echo. You stand near the hearth because it allows you to see the whole room without turning your head. You've practiced it. Peripheral awareness. Candlelight mathematics. You know which servant is walking too slow, which lady's maid brought in an extra pitcher, which lord is drinking water instead of wine because he's waiting. The waiting is what gets you. The long pauses between courses where no one speaks above a whisper. The ceremonial silences that echo louder than fanfare. The quiet just before the king demands another story or orders a song. These are the cracks in the night where danger seeps in. One evening, the king laughs too hard, slaps his goblet down, and yells for a duel of poetry between 2 guests. Everyone cheers. You watch. The first man stumbles through a metaphor about roses and regrets. The second man delivers a biting satire about royal taxes. The room goes still. You hold your breath. The king stares, then laughs again. You exhale. He was in a good mood. That time, later, you see the poet escorted out, quietly, no noise. You never see him again. The king likes boldness, but only when he feels invincible. If his gout is acting up, or if his horoscope warned of betrayal, he becomes a different man. Suspicious, lethal. So you learn to read the room like a manuscript. You notice who touches which utensils. You catalog who eats and who abstains. You memorize seating arrangements like a tactician preparing for siege. Because this is a siege, a slow one, fought with compliments instead of catapults. Your armor reflects the firelight. A child at the far end of the table points and whispers to his nursemaid, "Look, a knight. You're not a knight. You've never even been considered. Knights get land, horses, respect. You get sweat, silence, and stiff knees. But you smile, just barely. Let the boy dream. Maybe one day he'll be king. Maybe one day he'll remember the man who stood like a statue while everyone else toasted." You shift again. Your feet ache. Your back sings with tension. The wine is flowing now, which means soon the dancing will start. That's when things get unpredictable. Once, a visiting lord's wife tripped during a reel and fell into the king's lap. A jest, she claimed. Her husband claimed otherwise. He's now a monk. She's now married to the captain of the archers. You remember the incident not for its drama, but for what followed. The silence. The pause in the king's laughter. The way everyone held still until he blinked and chuckled, and how, 3 days later, the head of the royal dance instructor was found in the fountain. No sense of rhythm, the king said. You stop listening to music after that. You listen to footsteps instead. They're more honest. Banquet nights end in exhaustion. You escort the king back to his chambers, his belly full and his crown slightly askew. He's sleepy now, murmuring nonsense about falcons and lost cities. You stay 3 paces behind, hand on hilt, eyes on the shadows, always the shadows. They grow longer after midnight, twisting across marble and rug like serpents waiting to strike. The feast is over, but the danger isn't. It never is. Because somewhere behind the wine haze and roasted boar, a guest remembered a slight, a servant overheard a secret, a cousin saw an opening. You lie awake that night, armor off but boots still on, listening, thinking, waiting, because the next banquet might be your last, and you want to be ready. Traveling with the king is like trying to escort a cathedral on wheels. Everything must move, nothing can bend, and somehow you're the only one who isn't allowed to complain. You wake before dawn on departure days, not with excitement, but dread. Because royal travel is an adventure. It's suffering disguised as ceremony. The royal caravan is a snake of absurdity, dozens of carts, trunks of unnecessary garments, barrels of pickled things, cooks, bakers, 2 entire harpists, and somehow 4 astrologers. The bodyguards march beside it all, armor clanking, cloaks heavy with dew, tasked with keeping everything from falling apart while pretending it's all perfectly dignified. You ride a horse, if you're lucky. If not, you walk. On a good day, the mud only goes up to your calves. On a bad day, you lose a boot. Once, a fellow guard stepped in a puddle so deep his shoe vanished, and the king called it an omen. The poor man had to walk barefoot for a week, which earned him frostbite and a sermon from the royal chaplain about penitential symbolism. Historians still debate whether royal progresses served political ends or were merely vanity tours. You've seen enough to know it's both. The king believes that appearing before his subjects strengthens their loyalty. What actually happens is crowds of tired peasants are ordered to cheer while their livestock is trampled and their fences are stolen for firewood. You guard the king's litter while he naps inside it, snoring through silken curtains. Meanwhile, you're dodging rocks from local children and praying that nobody tries to impress the crown by presenting a goose. It always ends with the goose attacking someone. Always. On one memorable occasion, a ceremonial ox broke free and charged the treasurer. He screamed like a kettle and sprained his dignity. You didn't laugh. Not then, but later. Alone. You allowed yourself a single wheeze of joy. That's how you survive travel, by treasuring the absurd. Because otherwise, you're just tired. Bone tired. Road tired. The kind of tired that makes your teeth ache and your knuckles feel hollow. Your boots never dry. Your thighs chafe. You sleep in stables or on uneven floors in drafty keeps that smell like mildew and unwashed ambition. There's a reason no one romanticizes the road for royal bodyguards. It's all blisters and false alarms. The king refuses to travel without his best mattress. So, an entire ox cart is dedicated to hauling it. Once, it got stuck in the mud and took 6 men to free it. Meanwhile, the king rode ahead and asked why his dreams felt lumpier than usual. You nearly choked on your frustration. The cart driver wept. Ralph muttered something about sleeping on actual dirt being less insulting than carrying a bed you can't touch. Still, the caravan moves, slowly, painfully. You ride flank, eyes on the tree line, sword ready, bladder full. You can't stop to relieve yourself, not unless someone of higher rank gives the okay. Sometimes they forget. One poor soul had to invent a story about checking the perimeter for wolves just to sneak behind a tree. He returned with leaves in his belt and dignity left behind. You learn to hold it. That's the unspoken motto of royal travel: hold everything. Hold your tongue. Hold your breath. Hold your urge to scream when the king throws a tantrum because his mirror cracked. The cracked mirror, by the way, was blamed on travel demons. The priest confirmed it after consulting a constellation chart drawn on a goat's hide. The solution: Stopped for 3 days while he burned herbs and said complicated words in Latin. You guarded the ritual in the rain, soaked through, shivering while the king demanded ginger biscuits and wept about omens. Sometimes, you think you're hallucinating. One journey, a noblewoman insisted her dog had spoken to her in rhyme. The king found it hilarious. You had to guard the dog for 2 days, just in case it repeated the performance. It didn't. It peed on your boots. Still, you nodded when asked if it had divine energy. There's a rhythm to the madness. Pack, walk, sweat, guard, unpack, repeat. You become a creature of movement, a mule in armor, a statue with blisters. You no longer care where you're going, only how many steps until you stop. You track distance by pain knees throbbing 15 miles, lower back tight, 20, vision blurry, time to faint. You've fainted once, only once, during a particularly hot stretch across the southern hills. The king insisted on a midday parade. You collapsed mid-step, woke up under a tree with Ralph muttering, "Lucky, trees are softer than politics." You thanked him. He handed you water. No one else spoke of it again. That's the code. Failures are buried under silence, as long as they don't inconvenience the king. You ride again the next day, pretending nothing happened, pretending your legs aren't jelly, and your pride isn't leaking out your ears. On the 4th week of travel, everything smells like everything else. Horses smell like bread. Bread smells like sweat. Sweat smells like fear. You begin to confuse names, towns, titles. You greet a bishop as my Lord Log. He doesn't notice. He's drunk on communion wine. You envy him. Sometimes, in the dead of night, you wonder if you're still real. You touch your armor to make sure it hasn't rusted onto your skin. It has, metaphorically, travel erases the line between man and uniform. You are what you carry, and what you carry is duty, steel, and the occasional half-crushed beetle in your boot. Finally, after weeks of grueling terrain and performative pageantry, you return to the capital. The gates rise like a promise, and you think briefly that you might get a day to rest. You don't. You're expected at evening assembly. You shine your armor, hide your limp, and stand behind the throne like nothing happened. The king thanks the court for their loyalty. No mention of the guards, not even a nod. You're background again. A piece of furniture with lungs. You try to sleep that night. The bed is too soft. The silence, too loud. You miss the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels, the occasional goose, even the ache in your thighs that told you were moving. Now you're still, and somehow that hurts more. Ralph passes by your bunk. Back home, he says. What's worse than that? You don't answer. You already know the answer. What's worse than the road is what waits at the end of it, the return to ceremony, suspicion, and the reminder that even hell gives you a view sometimes. The palace does not. The palace just stares. The ceremonies are the worst kind of torture, slow, rigid, and performed under the illusion that standing still is somehow noble. You're assigned to stand beside the eastern pillar in the Great Hall for the monthly tribute ritual, a pompous affair where minor nobles come to present gifts and flatter the king, in the hopes that he might remember their name or, more realistically, forget their debts. You've been standing in this spot for 3 hours, knees locked, ankles burning, trying not to blink too loud. The king is seated on a raised dais under a tapestry of himself, slaying a lion. He's never killed anything larger than a chicken, but the embroidery is impressive. Your armor is clean, too clean. You can feel the polish stiffen in the seams, making your shoulders pinch with every breath. You shift your weight slightly, slowly, like a glacier changing course, praying no one notices. Ceremonial posture is part performance, part punishment. You're told that presence matters, that the image of the king, flanked by his silent, motionless guards, projects strength, but you know the truth. It just makes the nobles nervous, and a nervous noble is less likely to bring a dagger in his boot. The air is thick with incense and the stench of over-applied perfume. Someone in the gallery is wheezing. A child drops a wooden toy. You resist the urge to flinch. Flinching is weakness. Weakness is remembered. You learned that your first week on the job, when a guard near the queen sneezed during a prayer, he claimed it was dust. He was reassigned to external oversight in the North Tower. No stairs, just rope ladders. He lasted a month. Historians still debate whether royal guards were chosen for loyalty or silence. You suspect it was both. Loyalty keeps you at your post. Silence keeps you alive. The tribute line moves slowly. A merchant presents dyed wool. A baron offers a jeweled comb. A foreign envoy bows so deeply he almost falls. The king nods, smiles, and occasionally mutters something witty that no one dares to laugh at. You know his wit isn't sharp, it's recycled. Half his jokes come from the court jester, the other half come from his own dreams, which he interprets as divine inspiration. Once, he dreamt of a fish with antlers and demanded the court theologian declare it a symbol of royal fertility. The theologian complied. You watched it all from your pillar, trying not to stare at the tapestry where the lion's eyes seem to follow you. Time moves differently during ceremonies. Minutes become molasses. Your thoughts drift into strange corners. You count ceiling tiles. You recite the names of everyone in your bunkhouse backward. You imagine what it would feel like to scream, just once, and watch the entire court freeze. You never do it, but the thought lingers like a splinter. Ralph once said that standing still too long makes your soul want to leave your body. He may be right. You start to feel transparent. Your fingertips tingle. Your feet go numb. And still, the line continues. Now it's a minor prince with a pet falcon. The bird shrieks. Everyone pretends it didn't. The king smiles like this is all terribly amusing. You stare at the bird. The bird stares back. You both want to fly away. You imagine that. Sometimes what it would feel like to simply walk out. Not in shame, not in rebellion, just in quiet defiance. To slip off the armor, drop the sword, and vanish into the hills where no one knows your name or expects you to stand perfectly still for hours while being ignored. But you don't, because you know what comes next. The ceremonial exit. When the king rises, when the music starts, when the entire room bows and you're expected to pivot in perfect unison with the other guards. If you're a fraction late, it's noticed. If you're early, it's treason. So you wait. You rehearse the move in your mind, left foot, quarter turn, eyes straight, chin high. You've done it 1,000 times, but your body always remembers the time you stumbled. A small misstep. Enough for a snicker from the gallery. Enough to cost you 3 nights of cleaning armor with vinegar and cold rags. The king finally rises. Trumpets sound. Everyone moves like clockwork. And you with them. Precision. Grace. The illusion of loyalty carved into every movement. You escort him down the hall, past the nobles, through the arched door where the scent of fresh air dares to tempt you. But you're not done yet. He's headed to the chapel for the blessing. Another hour of standing. This time in the flickering light of candles that make your shadow seem taller, sadder. The priest chants in Latin. You don't understand the words, but you feel their weight. Not because they're holy, because they're long, so very long. You listen for phrases you recognize. Damen, regem, gloriam, words the king loves. He believes Latin hides truth, as if mysticism is more secure in foreign syllables. Once, he asked if you spoke it. You said no. He nodded approvingly. Good. Fewer people should understand the divine. You nodded back, silently agreeing that ignorance is often safer. You glance at the stained glass. It depicts saints, martyrs, kings of old. None of them are guards. No one paints the men who stood behind the throne, who bled quietly so that ceremonies like this could happen without interruption. Your stomach growls. You haven't eaten since dawn. A crust of bread, a sliver of onion. That's all. You can't leave your post. Not for food, not for relief, not even if your legs cramp so hard they twitch. Once, you saw a man piss himself during ceremony. He stood perfectly still. No one mentioned it. He was given a commendation the next day for unwavering discipline. You still don't know if it was a punishment or a compliment. The priest drones on. The king looks bored. His crown tilts. You resist the urge to straighten it. That's not your job. Touching the crown is forbidden unless instructed. It symbolizes divine right. And you're just a man trying not to faint in a building full of symbolism. The ceremony ends with bells, loud, echoing, triumphant. Your ears ring for minutes, but you move, always, with the procession, down the hall, into the courtyard, back to the chamber. Another performance complete. The king dismisses everyone with a wave. You bow. You walk backward, never turning your back on him. Then, finally, you're free. For now. You remove your helmet. Your hair's soaked. Your face is pale. Your fingers twitch from standing too long. But you lived. You did your duty. No one noticed you, which means you did it perfectly. You see the queen only occasionally, and when you do, you make it a point not to see her too clearly. Not because she isn't worth noticing, she's sharp as flint, graceful like a lie, and always a little too observant, but because noticing her too much is dangerous. She exists in a different kind of silence, the kind woven from veils and glances and words spoken in the space between syllables. The king trusts her because he has to. You don't trust her because you understand what survival looks like in silk. When she walks past your post, her perfume arrives before she does something floral, but bitter. Like a bouquet placed on a grave, you don't look directly at her face. Just enough of a glance to confirm identity. Then eyes to the floor, hands steady, breath shallow. Once, a guard tried to be charming, held her gaze for a moment too long. He claimed he was just tired. She smiled. He vanished within a week. Officially reassigned to a border fortress. Unofficially, no one speaks his name. You call him too curious. Everyone else does too. There's a lesson in that. Not just about discretion, but about mirrors, because the queen, more than anyone else in court, reflects exactly what others project. With the king, she's demure. With the dukes, calculating. With the servants, imperious. But with the guards, she's unreadable. Because she doesn't have to charm you. She just has to make sure you remember who truly commands the shadows. You're assigned to her retinue one afternoon. An escort for her walk through the garden. It sounds pleasant, even idyllic, until you realize what it means. You'll be walking 5 paces behind a woman who knows more secrets than the spy master. Through paths lined with hedges high enough to hide a dozen knives. You check every bush. You walk with your hand near your blade, not out of fear for her safety, but because you've seen what happens when a guard misses a detail during her outings. One time, a gardener let a rose branch snag her dress. The next morning, he was relocated. Rumor says to a salt flat on the southern coast. No roses there. You keep your distance. She walks in silence, pausing occasionally to examine a leaf, to frown at a flower that didn't bloom correctly. She doesn't speak to you, but she knows you're listening. She always knows. And then, just as you're beginning to believe the walk will end without a word, she stops, turns slightly, not enough to break the rules, just enough to say, without saying, that she's speaking to you. Do you ever wonder, she murmurs, as if to no one, how many things must remain unsaid for a kingdom to function? You say nothing? She smiles faintly. Good. Then keeps walking. You breathe again. Just once. Because even that was a test. Historians still debate the actual political influence queens held in medieval courts. You've watched her send men scurrying with a single raised eyebrow. You've watched her change the king's mind with a sentence too soft for scribes to hear. You've watched her study people the way a hawk studies a field, silently, patiently, ready to swoop. One evening, you're posted outside her personal chambers. The king is away hunting, though everyone knows it's an excuse to drink in peace. The hall is quiet, too quiet. You feel it first not in sound, but in the way the torches flicker without wind. Something's wrong. You adjust your grip on your weapon, just as the chamber door opens. It's her, alone. No attendants. She steps into the hall, meets your eyes not long enough to be improper, just long enough to prove she can. There's a letter being delivered tomorrow, she says softly, to the Bishop of Yore. You don't respond. She isn't asking. See that it arrives. Then she's gone. No further explanation. No parchment. No visible message. just instruction. You stand there for hours afterward, unsure if what happened was real. In the morning, a courier arrives with a velvet pouch. Inside, a letter, no seal, just a name. Handwritten. You do what you're told. You do not mention it. Not to Raoulf, not to the captain, not even to yourself. Because sometimes the queen speaks, and when she does, the air thickens. And you know your place not between her and danger, but between her and anyone who might ever dare to misunderstand her. Your job isn't to protect her, it's to respect her silence. You're not afraid of her. Not exactly. But you know better than to believe you understand her. That's a mistake men make once. She floats through the palace like a ghost made of iron, leaving behind whispers, faint laughter, and the occasional scandal wrapped in satin. There's a chambermaid who claims to have seen the queen writing with both hands at once. Another who swears the queen doesn't sleep, only waits. You don't entertain these rumors, but you don't dismiss them either. Not because they're true, but because in this place, belief is power, and the queen has more of it than anyone realizes. That's why you watch. That's why you stand straighter when her footsteps echo down the hall. That's why you make sure your armor gleams just a little brighter outside her door. Because one day, if the king falls, if the throne cracks, and the banners change, she won't blink. She'll still be standing. And you want her to remember that you always were, too. Ralph once joked that if the king and queen ever came to war, the guards would die of indecision. You didn't laugh, because he was right, but also because you'd already made your decision. You just hoped no one ever asked you to prove it. The queen's power is quiet, not like the king's, which roars and flails. Hers is subtle, inevitable, the way gravity pulls, the way time wins. And in this court, where every word is a trap and every look a ledger, you've learned that silence is not absence, it's dominance. The day your shift changes, and you're no longer posted near her quarters, you feel something like disappointment. You'll miss the dread, the precision, the thrill of not being noticed by someone who sees everything. Your new post is near the treasury, quieter, safer, boring. But at night, when the corridors creak and dreams turn sour, you sometimes think you hear her voice again, just beyond the torchlight, asking questions that have no safe answers. The queen might watch with silence, but when the king's paranoia takes hold, it arrives like a storm without clouds, sudden, suffocating, and impossible to prepare for. It always begins the same way: a pause in his speech, a glance that lingers a second too long, an innocent question cloaked in curiosity but sharpened by suspicion. Who was standing near the banner this morning, he asks. No context, no warning, just a question that sends everyone in the room tensing, including you. It doesn't matter if you were there. If he thinks you were, then you were. And if you weren't, you should have been. That's how paranoia works in a palace. It doesn't care about facts, only feelings. You remember once he accused the steward of plotting an uprising because his shoes were too quiet? The steward laughed. The next day he was replaced. The king never mentioned it again. You see the pattern, though. It always happens after something goes wrong. A storm delays a shipment. The roast comes out dry. A letter takes too long to arrive. Suddenly, the air grows cold, trust collapses, and someone has to be blamed. Historians still argue whether such royal paranoia was the result of legitimate threats or simply the side effect of absolute power. You don't argue. You live it. You watch it twist the king's posture, tighten his mouth, sour his voice. He begins pacing more, touching the hilt of his sword when no one's speaking. He starts whispering to people who used to stand 2 rooms away. You're reassigned to internal rotation. That's what they call it when the king doesn't know who to trust. So everyone must remain visible. Your job now is to stand in every corridor for at least 20 minutes per hour, rotating through a precise path, as if your mere presence will dissolve conspiracy. You see the same faces again and again. They nod. You nod. No one smiles. Smiling implies comfort. Comfort implies plotting. On your 3rd lap, you pass a tapestry of Saint Mercian slaying a demon. You glance at it. The demon looks like the court treasurer. You keep moving. The paranoia infects everyone eventually. The pages speak in whispers. The courtiers stay in clusters, eyes darting. Servants walk faster. Meals arrive late. The wine tastes like vinegar. The king begins talking to his dog again, not just in passing, but as if the dog is giving counsel. Once, you hear him murmur, "They can't all be trusted, can they?" Hrothgar followed by a bark that he takes as confirmation. You stand beside the throne and feel your stomach knot, because the more the king talks to his dog, the more dangerous things become. Last time this happened, 3 guards were dismissed for failure to anticipate danger. One of them had just recovered from a fever. He hadn't even returned to duty yet. He was accused in absentia, vanished before he could collect his boots. You remember his face, though. Everyone does. The fear of becoming him shapes your every move. You polish your armor twice a day. You make sure your helmet doesn't squeak. You adjust your stance by the inch, because paranoia doesn't just see mistakes. It invents them. The king starts keeping odd hours. He calls for meetings at midnight, summons ministers at dawn. You're expected to be present, always present. You don't sleep anymore. You nap, fully clothed, boots on, sword within reach. You dream in fragments corridors, flames, eyes that don't blink. Ralph says you snore now. You never used to. It's the exhaustion pulling the noise out of your chest like wind through a cracked window. You apologize. He waves it off. Means you're still breathing. He mutters, "You think about that. How low the bar has fallen. You used to want respect. Now you want breath." The king summons the captain of the guard. The captain doesn't return for 2 hours. When he does, he's pale, silent. He doesn't meet anyone's eyes. You know better than to ask, but something changes after that. The next day, the courtyard is full of new guards, foreigners. They speak little of your language and march in awkward unison. The king says they're a special addition to bolster security. You know what they really are: replacements in waiting, insurance, leverage. You're not allowed near them. They're housed separately, eat separately, train in the moonlight when the rest of you are on shift. You begin to feel the walls closing in. Even your boots feel tighter, as if the palace itself is shrinking. You ask the armorer for a size up. He shrugs. No extras. A lie, but a necessary one. The paranoia eats supplies, trust, and truth. It chews through hierarchy, custom, and memory. People forget what normal looked like. A noblewoman faints during a sermon. She's accused of faking it. A cook slices his thumb. He's accused of sabotage. A priest misquotes a psalm. He's placed under observation. You start to carry extra water, but you drink it slowly. Too much at once is suspicious. You learn to fold your hands a certain way, palms in, fingers loose, looks relaxed, non-threatening. You rehearse it in the mirror. That mirror is cracked now. You think it happened during cleaning, but no one will admit it. Everyone's afraid it's a sign. The king starts wearing armor at dinner. Full plate. It clinks against his goblet. He insists it helps digestion. You nod. Always nod. Ralph whispers to you one night. Voice like sandpaper. He thinks we're the threat now. You don't respond. You don't want to agree out loud, because walls have ears. And sometimes, so do dogs. The king announces a new oath. All guards must swear again. In blood. Just a drop, but enough to prove sincerity. You stand in line. You press your thumb to the dagger. Let the bead rise. It stings. You don't flinch. Flinching is remembered. The priest records each oath in a black ledger. You see him write slowly, carefully. You wonder what he adds in the margins. Ralph goes after you. His hand shakes. The priest pauses, looks up. For a moment, you think it's over. Then he nods. Ralph steps back, lives another day. But now the air feels different between you, as if the oath has sewn something into your skin, something cold, invisible, binding. The king holds court in silence now. No music, no gestures, just eyes, watching. You stand behind his chair, aware of every breath. You can feel his paranoia like heat, radiating, infecting. A merchant brings news of rebellion in the east. The king dismisses him, then later arrests him. He looked too calm. The king explains. That night, You walk the halls and hear footsteps that don't belong to anyone you know. They stop when you stop, start when you start. You don't investigate. You've learned not to chase shadows. Shadows report to someone else now. You sleep less, eat less, speak less. You're not alone. Everyone is becoming smaller, quieter, blurrier. The palace is becoming a haunted house of living statues, all waiting for the next accusation. And yet, you endure, because you know the king will sleep eventually. And when he does, even his paranoia has to close its eyes. And while it sleeps, you'll still be there, standing just beyond the edge of torchlight, motionless, wordless, loyal, or at least convincing enough to pass. They say war is the proving ground for knights, for generals, for glory. But for the king's personal guard, war is just another flavor of exhaustion, served hot with fewer walls to lean against. You don't ride at the front, you don't lead charges or wave banners. You follow one man and keep him alive, no matter how foolish his decisions or how muddy the battlefield becomes. You guard the king as he rides in his ornate saddle, shielded from most of the real combat, but close enough to feel the thrill of danger without the risk. You're not given the luxury of distance. You ride flank. You take the arrows meant for him. You sleep in armor and wake with your face pressed into a rock, mouth full of grit. When the king declares a campaign, it means months away from the palace, with only iron, cold bread, and the weight of ceremonial stupidity for company. His tent alone takes 15 men to assemble, all while you stand guard, soaked in rain, watching peasants stare with both awe and resentment. You can see it in their eyes. They're not cheering. They're memorizing faces, counting horses, wondering who to rob when night falls. And you're in the middle. Not royalty, not common, just the wall between both. The king has a habit of giving speeches before battles. He mounts a hill or a cart, raises a sword polished to uselessness, and shouts about honor and God and destiny. You watch the men around him nod, some out of belief, others because they don't want to be noticed, not nodding. You don't nod. You're behind him. He can't see you, but even then, your hand is on your hilt, because there's always a chance someone takes his inspiration a little too far and rushes forward before the signal. Or worse, someone decides that killing the speaker is the quickest path to peace. Historians argue whether royal bodyguards fought or merely protected during war. The answer is simple: you do whatever keeps him breathing. That means fighting, yes, but not bravely, not with flourishes or banners. You fight like a cornered animal, efficient, grim, and without illusion. One time, a knight charged the king's right side during a skirmish. You stepped in, your sword broke his. He tried to grapple you. You crushed his windpipe with your elbow. Later, the king said, "I barely noticed." That's the point. You're not there to be noticed. You're there so he doesn't notice death creeping closer. The battlefield smells like hot metal and raw meat. Flies buzz even before the dying finish bleeding. You grow used to the noise, the clanging, the screaming, the wet sounds. What you never get used to is the aftermath. The silence when the dust settles and the king is still alive. And you realize how many others aren't. You walk the field afterward, stepping over bodies, some of which you knew, most of which you didn't. Once, you find Ralph slumped against a tree, armor dented, blood pooling beneath his knees. He's breathing, barely. You kneel. He smiles weakly and says, "Still here." You carry him back to the tents yourself. His leg is ruined. They remove it. He doesn't scream, just stares at the ceiling, blinking slowly. After that, he's retired to the archives, a quiet room with scrolls and ink. He jokes it's safer there. You believe him, you miss him. In his place, you're assigned a new partner, a boy named Elric. Fresh-faced, eager, hopeless. He polishes his armor twice a day and still thinks of war as noble. You don't correct him. War will do that for you. During a siege, you're posted beside the king while he inspects the front line. He wears a gleaming breastplate that he hasn't used in years. He asks you, "Do I look like a warrior?" You say, "Yes, Your Majesty." He smiles. Moments later, An arrow strikes the ground a few feet from his horse. He flinches. You don't. You already saw the archer half-starved. No real aim. Still, the king orders a retaliation. The trebuchets fire. The walls crack. The king returns to his tent, pleased. You stay behind to count the dead. That night, he eats roasted duck. You chew jerky. The king dreams loudly. You lie awake. Always. Elric asks if you think the war will end soon. You tell him. Not while someone's still profiting. He doesn't understand. You don't explain. The next day, the king declares the siege a success, even though the city hasn't surrendered. Even though half the camp has dysentery. Even though your boots squelch when you walk, he rides through the camp like a hero. People cheer. You see their eyes. They're cheering for an ending. Any ending. You ride behind him, wondering if they know how close he came to dying 2 nights ago. When a saboteur slipped into camp and poisoned a water jug, you stopped it. Quietly, no one praised you. The saboteur vanished, probably hanged behind the cook's tent. No ceremony, just a problem solved. That's how it works out here. The king never hears about half of it. You bleed so he doesn't have to think. You kill so he can dine in peace. You ride so he can pretend he's leading. There's a kind of poetry in it, a bleak, bruised kind. During one march, the king loses a ring, stops everything, refuses to proceed until it's found. You search for 6 hours in the mud, elbow deep. Elric finds it, wedged in a hoofprint. The king rewards him with a silver coin. Elric beams. That night, you hear him whispering to it like it's holy. You don't tell him it's cursed. Not the coin, the attention. The moment the king sees you as useful is the moment you become disposable. Better to be a shadow, a figure behind the throne, a name never spoken. So, it never needs to be forgotten. Eventually, the war ends. Not with glory, not with banners. Just a damp letter signed in another language and delivered by a shivering courier. The king accepts it with ceremony. He reads it aloud, declares victory. Everyone cheers. You don't. You're already packing, because the war might be over. But the real suffering is back at court, where eyes watch more than blades swing, where meals kill slower, where comfort is a trap and stillness is suspicion. Elric asks what it means to go home. You say, it means new armor and the same fear. He looks confused. He won't be for long. As you ride back toward the palace, its towers rising like jagged teeth on the horizon, you feel no relief, only dread. Because out here, at least the danger was honest, visible, loud. Back there, it's quiet. It smiles, it curtsies, it plays music while it judges you. You reach the gate, the guards salute, the king waves, the crowd cheers. You dismount, stretch aching joints, and return to your post. Just another war behind you. Just another mask to put back on. Peace is supposed to be a gift, but for the king's bodyguard, it's a slow, suffocating punishment. Without war, there is no urgency, only protocol, pageantry, and the hollow repetition of ceremonial duty. You rise each morning not to the call of a horn or the stomp of boots, but to the rustle of feathered quills scratching names you'll never know into ledgers you'll never read. The palace feels quieter now, but not safer, just heavier, as if every wall has started listening more closely. You miss the chaos of the battlefield, not because you enjoyed it, but because it was honest. Now your greatest threat is the crushing sameness of routine, of standing guard in echoing halls, while the king meets with treasurers and scribes, discussing matters you're not meant to understand. Your armor grows stiff from disuse. The sword at your side, once kissed by blood and smoke, now shines too brightly, too clean. You practice drills with the younger guards, but it's not training. It's pageantry. You're no longer honing skills, you're performing a memory of usefulness. The king no longer calls for midnight inspections or emergency speeches. Instead, he worries about coin counts, invitations to foreign banquets, and which color his new banners should be. You try to look interested, you nod when spoken to, You say, "Yes, Your Majesty," with just the right rhythm. Not too quick might seem sarcastic, not too slow might seem suspicious. You know the art of empty obedience. It becomes a second language. Ralph used to say, "Peace makes you fat in the soul," and fat souls. He said, "Get butchered in silence." He's gone now. Still alive, but gone. Buried somewhere between scrolls and ink pots in the royal archives, mumbling to himself about troop formations from wars no one remembers. You visited him once. He didn't recognize you, just muttered, "Is the perimeter secure?" You nodded. He smiled. Peace stole him. You fear it might steal you too. Not your life, your edge, your reason, your name. You wake sometimes in the barracks, drenched in sweat, hand wrapped around your dagger, breath ragged, but there's nothing there. Just another night of stillness, another hour until sunrise. You think about requesting reassignment to the borderlands, but that would require paperwork, and paperwork means attention, and attention, even now, is a trap. So you stay, you polish your boots, you stand your post, you practice drawing your sword quietly, just in case. The king starts hosting tournaments again. Jousts, feasts, dances, things to distract the court from the absence of war. You're placed on detail for everyone, posted behind thrones, beside stages, at the edge of candlelit dance floors. You watch men in armor charge each other for sport while the crowd roars. You watch nobles drink until their laughter sounds like sobbing. You watch dancers twirl, masks hiding their boredom. The king smiles at all of it, believing he's brought joy. He hasn't. He's brought performance. You recognize the same fatigue in their eyes that you see in yours. At one feast, a noble collapses mid-toast. Everyone assumes he's drunk. You step forward, check his pulse. He's breathing, barely. You carry him out. Later, you hear whispers of poison. Nothing confirmed. No one blamed. Just a quiet shift in the seating chart at the next event. You're not thanked. You're not questioned. You just return to your post. Pieces full of these moments, cracks in the marble. Hairline fractures that no one admits are there, but you see them. You always do. You once saw a kitchen boy drop a bottle of oil. He froze. Everyone looked away. The stain remained for days. No one cleaned it. Not because they didn't care, but because they were afraid. Afraid that touching it might be seen as involvement. You understand. Touch nothing. Leave no trace. Survive the stillness. That's the rule now. The queen, during peace, grows even quieter. She speaks less, but her presence sharpens. She drifts through the halls like a blade wrapped in silk. You're stationed near her garden again one afternoon. She's pruning roses, alone. No attendants. She gestures for you. You step forward. She hands you a thorn. Just one. Long. Blood dark. Says nothing. Then returns to her pruning. You keep the thorn. Tuck it in your belt pouch. Later. You stare at it under candlelight, wondering what it meant. A warning. A reward. A reminder. All three. You never ask. That's part of the job, accepting symbols without needing their meanings. The king becomes more restless. He orders the repainting of hallways, the redesign of his personal crest. He spends hours selecting new robes. He begins writing poetry. It's not good. You read one once, left on a bench. It compared love to a tax ledger. You pretended not to laugh. You left it where you found it. Eventually, he decides to inspect the barracks. A surprise visit. You're there when he arrives. He sniffs, wrinkles his nose. Smells like sweat and memory, he says. No one responds. He asks how morale is. Everyone says strong in perfect unison. He nods. Good, he says. Peace builds character. Then he leaves. You exhale only after the door closes. Because peace doesn't build character. It erodes it. Slowly, without mercy, you start to lose track of the days. The bells ring the same. The meals taste the same. The faces blur. You begin naming cracks in the wall. One looks like a bird. One like a blade. One like Ralph's crooked grin. You check them daily. A ritual, a sanity anchor, a reminder that something still changes, even if no one admits it. One morning, a pigeon lands on your shoulder. You don't move. It coos once, then flies away. Later, the captain asks what happened. You say, nothing. He nods, but you both know it wasn't nothing. It was proof. You've stood still long enough to be mistaken for stone. You wonder if that's what the king wants now. Guards that no longer think, only endure. Peace isn't safe. It's just quiet. And in that quiet, you feel yourself hardening, becoming part of the palace. Not a man, not a soldier, just another pillar holding up a roof no one appreciates. You try to write once, a letter to no one. Just ink on parchment. You get 5 lines in, then burn it. Paper leaves trails. Trails invite attention. Attention is still a threat. So you return to the hall, post by the arch, same stance, same breath, same silence. Because while the war was chaos, peace is a trap. And every day you survive, it is another quiet victory that no one sees. Training never stops, even when there's nothing left to train for. Peace has a way of making drills feel more like rituals, hollow movements repeated out of habit rather than purpose. Still, you show up. You run the circuits in the courtyard. You swing your sword against straw dummies that no longer fight back. You grapple with younger recruits who grunt too loud and move too slow. Your muscles remember what your mind sometimes forgets, that this job, at its core, is about readiness. Readiness for a moment that may never come. You spar until your knuckles bleed and your breath rasps like worn leather, not because you expect a battle, but because you fear what will happen if your body forgets how to react. Rust is the real enemy now, not in your sword, but in your reflexes, in your instincts. The drills are no longer about victory. They're about not slipping into softness, and softness, in your position, is a kind of death. The captain watches from the balcony sometimes, arms crossed, saying nothing. You know he's measuring each swing, each stumble, not with concern, but calculation. Who's fading? Who's sharp? Who can be trusted when the silence breaks? That's what training is now, a test without questions, where every movement is an answer you didn't know you were giving. Historians often romanticize the discipline of royal guards during peace, as though structure itself were noble. But structure is just another name for containment. You're not being owned. You're being held in shape, like molten metal in a mold you're not allowed to outgrow. The drills shift in emphasis every season. Sword 1 month, archery the next, formation practice, obstacle runs. They rotate not to challenge, but to distract. You recognize it. The endless loop isn't for readiness, it's for management. Keep the guards busy, and they won't think. Keep them sweating, and they won't notice they're not fighting for anything anymore. You keep going, you run the course, you climb the walls, you spar with Elric, who has finally stopped smiling so much. His stance has improved. He no longer flinches when you faint. You see the change in him, the weight in his movements, the caution in his gaze. He's learning, not from the drills, but from the spaces between them. That's where the truth lives now. In the stillness between blows, in the silence after the whistle. You train in silence more than ever. Words are dangerous in peace. Even compliments can be traps. So you nod. You adjust your grip. You correct your balance. You bleed without comment. The weapons master tries to keep spirits high. He cracks jokes that echo off stone. Few laugh, but that's not the point. The point is to make noise, to keep the air moving, to keep the walls from closing in. Some days, you train until you forget what time it is. You watch the sun move across the courtyard like a slow knife, cutting the sky open inch by inch. You train in rain, in fog, in the dead breath of afternoon, where everything feels like it might collapse under its own weight. Once, a trainee sprains his wrist during a drill. He apologizes, profusely, not because he's ashamed, but because he's afraid of being replaced. You help him to the bench, wrap his hand, say nothing. That's what mercy looks like now. Quiet assistance without acknowledgement. If you talk too much, someone will think you're building alliances, and alliances, even friendly ones, make the wrong people nervous. One morning, the training field is covered in frost. Your fingers freeze around your hilt. You swing anyway. The numbness feels like freedom. When you can't feel pain, you can't be distracted. You strike the target over and over until the straw splits. The weapons master nods once. That's all the praise you get. That's all you need. You sharpen your blade afterward, slowly, methodically, dragging the whetstone like a priest performing penance. You take care of your weapon better than you take care of your own hands. You barely notice the blisters anymore. They've hardened into something permanent, a reminder of every swing, every missed meal, every moment you chose discipline over comfort. Elric watches you sometimes. Ask questions he's not supposed to ask. Do you think we'll be needed again? You shrug. We're always needed, just not always appreciated. He frowns. That doesn't seem fair. You look at him and think about all the guards who asked similar questions and are now gone disbanded, disappeared, reassigned to posts so remote even maps forget them. Fair's a story nobles tell to keep peace in their beds. You reply. He doesn't ask again. That's the other lesson of training in peace, how to hold your tongue. You learn to speak with your posture, with the angle of your blade, with the rhythm of your breath. Everything else is a risk. The king sometimes watches from the balcony too, flanked by advisors who speak to each other more than to him. He nods approvingly at the drills. You wonder if he remembers your name. If he ever truly learned it, you doubt it. You're part of the scenery now, a moving statue, a placeholder for violence that's been neatly wrapped and filed under just in case. You dream about war, sometimes, not with longing, but with clarity. In battle, everything is clear. You know who to fight, where to stand, when to act. In peace, everything blurs. You're not sure if your strength is loyalty or just endurance. You're not sure anyone cares. You train anyway, because that's the only thing that still feels real. One afternoon, a visiting noble comes to observe the drills. He brings his son, a boy barely 12, wearing silk and arrogance. The boy laughs at the clumsier trainees, throws a grape at Elric. Elric ignores him. You step slightly out of formation, just enough to make eye contact. The boy stops laughing. The noble notices, says nothing. That evening, a message arrives. Your performance was exemplary. No coin, no promotion, just a note. You burn it. Compliments from above carry more weight than your mail pouch. They slow you down, make you visible. You can't afford that. You drill again the next day, harder, faster. You bruise your thumb, splinter a shield, lose feeling in your left foot. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you're not forgotten by yourself, that you still feel the edge, that you can still move when movement is called for. You train like you're being hunted, because in a way, you are, not by an enemy, not by blades, but by peace itself. It circles you, lulls you, makes you doubt your purpose, so you push back, with sweat, with discipline, with silence, because if you stop, even once, you might never start again. And then they win, whoever they are, the ones who want you to soften, the ones who want you to forget what it means to be sharp. The palace holds secrets, and you've learned to live beside them like mice in the granary, never seen, never heard, but always aware. The deeper your service runs, the less you ask. You begin to sense when something unspoken is happening, not by what's said, but by what's missing. A certain advisor no longer joins the king for breakfast. A particular tapestry is taken down without explanation. Guards you spoke to yesterday are gone this morning. Their bunks empty. Their names erased from the rotation. You don't ask where they went. You don't whisper their names. That would imply you noticed. And noticing is dangerous. There's a phrase the veterans use. The less you know, the longer you last. You live by it. The corridors you walk each day are unchanged, but the feeling in the air shifts. It always does before something breaks. The palace grows quieter, as if even the stones are holding their breath. When a secret surfaces, it doesn't walk through the front gate. It slips through cracks. A servant runs past you with pale eyes. A council member's hands tremble while holding a goblet. The librarian locks the door and turns away too quickly. And then, one day, the spymaster is replaced. No announcement, just a new man in a darker cloak, asking fewer questions, giving colder orders. You salute him. He doesn't return it. You're meant to feel beneath notice. It works. Afterward, you're assigned to hallway duty outside the royal study. Not a new post, but one with history. You've stood there before once, long ago, during a meeting between the king and a foreign ambassador that ended with 2 translators going missing. Now you're back, older, quieter, sharper. You recognize the shift in tone inside the study without hearing words. Raised voices have been replaced with lowered ones. That's worse. Raised voices at least signal honesty. Whispering means fear, the kind of fear that makes people confess things they don't want to admit. You stand with your back straight and your ears open. You hear nothing, but the silence is informative. Too long, too heavy. The door opens suddenly. The king steps out, face pale, lips pursed, eyes scanning the hallway like a man trying to recall whether he's already been betrayed. He glances at you, but doesn't speak. That's how you know it's serious. When he's angry, he yells. When he's paranoid, he whispers. But when he's scared, truly scared, he says nothing at all. That silence walks beside you for days. Rumors crawl beneath doors like rats. Talk of rebellion, not from peasants or distant barons, but from within. The kind of betrayal that has signatures and seals. You're not told details, but you see the results. More guards at every post, fewer smiles, more people avoiding eye contact. One night, you're summoned to the inner chamber. You walk the familiar route, torchlit hallways, echoing tiles, the quiet hush of midnight decisions. The king is there, seated but not relaxed. He gestures for you to approach. You kneel. He doesn't tell you to rise. Instead, he looks at you as if trying to determine whether you're real or imagined. You've been with me a long time, he says. You nod. He watches. Do you believe in loyalty? The question isn't rhetorical. You answer, yes, Your Majesty. He nods again, slowly. Then, even when loyalty means burying truth, you don't flinch. Especially then. That pleases him. Or maybe it doesn't. His expression doesn't change. He dismisses you with a wave. You leave, unsure if you passed a test or failed one you didn't know existed. The next morning, you're handed a sealed letter and told to deliver it outside the palace walls. No explanation. No escort. You ride alone, wearing civilian clothes, sword wrapped in cloth, face unmarked by insignia. You feel exposed, not by danger, but by lack of identity. When you arrive at the destination, a crumbling estate half swallowed by ivy, you hand the letter to a woman who doesn't smile, doesn't speak, just nods and disappears into the ruin. You don't wait for a reply. You ride back through mist and morning frost, thinking of the king's eyes and the woman's silence, and the growing pressure that peace was never peace at all. Just delay, just build up, just the long breath before the crack. Back at the palace, things are the same but wrong. The food is still served, the bells still chime, the banners still hang, but everything feels thinner, like a surface stretched too tight. You start to sleep in shifts again, not because you're on night duty, but because you no longer trust rest. You start checking the straps on your greaves twice. You test your sword edge every other morning. You oil your armor even when it doesn't need it. These are not habits. These are survival rhythms. You speak less with Elric. He's growing into his armor, but his eyes are still too open, too hopeful. He asks once why the mood has changed. You shrug, say, weather. He nods, but doesn't believe you. You can see the doubt forming. That's how it starts, doubt, then hesitation, then mistakes. And mistakes in the palace don't end with correction. They end with curtains drawn tight and names removed from duty charts. The queen becomes more present. You see her more frequently, moving between wings of the palace with subtle purpose, always accompanied by servants who speak too little and listen too much. She meets your eyes once, just once. You hold the gaze longer than you should. She smiles, almost imperceptibly. You feel the chill of it for hours. That night, you hear footsteps outside your door. You don't move. You don't breathe. The steps pass. No knock. Just presence. Just a reminder. The palace is alive now, watching itself, testing for cracks. You start hearing things that aren't there, a sigh behind a door, a whisper in an empty hall. You tell yourself it's nothing, then you remember in the palace. Nothing is often where the danger hides best. You remain at your post, always. When the summons come, you go. When the silences stretch too long, you stand straighter. When you're asked to deliver letters, you don't read them. When you're handed a pouch without explanation, you carry it without question. This is your role now, not just protector, but participant. Not in plans, but in their execution. You are the hand that moves the stone, not the voice that commands it. And as the days slip further into a tension no one names, you understand that something is coming. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the stillness is too thick, the air too charged, and you are too practiced at reading the invisible. You don't know what's coming, but you know it will demand everything you've preserved, every skill, every instinct, every shred of discipline that peace tried to erase. You are not ready. You are not calm, but you are waiting. And that, more than anything, is the mark of a bodyguard who has survived too long to doubt what comes next. There's a bitter taste to waiting, and by now it coats the back of your tongue like old copper. You've lived through the sword-drawn chaos of war, the choking boredom of ceremonial peace, and now you drift in the kind of silence that feels too deliberate, too watchful. The palace isn't sleeping, it's listening. You hear it in the soft clinks of armor that stop just a second too early when someone passes your corridor, in the sudden silences that fall when you step into a room. Even the servants' footsteps seem rehearsed. Everyone has become quieter, faster, sharper, but not in a way that breeds unity. It's the silence of splintering. Something is cracking beneath the polished marble and gold-threaded tapestries, but no one dares look down. You've learned to track signs the way a hunter studies wind. The king's schedule has changed: shorter meals, more private meetings. His trusted circle grows smaller, tighter, and more rigid. The guards around him shift more frequently, as though he's testing for cracks in his own protection. You're reassigned to outer rotation again, near the armory. You know what that means. They want you visible, but away from anything sensitive. Not a punishment, not quite, just a reminder. A leash. You comply. You polish your breastplate. You maintain formation. You don't question the reassignment. And that's the test you pass simply by not reacting. But even here, at the edge of relevance, you see the signs. The quartermaster keeps a ledger open but hides his notes. The scribe who records training reports no longer signs his name. A cook asks for your patrol route, just to make sure the bread cart doesn't block your path. Too many people are asking questions that sound harmless, but come too late in the day, too casually, with too much effort to appear natural. You note them all. You say nothing. The palace is a well-fed animal, bloated on secrets. You feel its unease ripple under your boots as you walk the same paths over and over, tracing the same stone patterns, pretending you're not cataloging which windows stay open at night, which doors have new locks, which guards have new eyes. One evening, just after sunset, you catch a glimpse of something odd, a lantern swaying in the east garden, where no light should be. It disappears too quickly. You report it. Your superior nods, makes a note, tells you to keep eyes open. You already were. The next day, nothing is said, but you're moved again, this time back inside. The king's wing, a subtle promotion, perhaps, or a trap. You accept it without comment, and now you find yourself once more standing near his chamber doors. Just like in the earliest days of your service, the carpet's been replaced. The scent of burnt cedar lingers, disguise or cleansing. You're not sure. You feel like a shadow revisiting its birthplace. Inside, the king coughs more. You hear it at night, low and wet, the kind of cough that never really leaves. He's not sick, not officially, but something is taking more effort out of him. His steps have slowed. His voice, though still sharp, carries less weight. His orders are repeated more often by those around him. You realize the kingdom is already shifting, pivoting toward a future it hasn't named yet, and everyone is jostling for position around a man who may no longer be able to see them clearly. This is when the real danger begins, not when the king dies, but when people start to plan for what happens after. Historians love to focus on the moment of a monarch's death. They rarely write about the weeks before when the body still walks. But the power starts to float free, like heat rising from a dying fire. That's where you are now, the in-between, the pre-collapse. And the thing no one wants to admit is this: bodyguards like you don't just protect kings. You witness the slow rot. You memorize the faces of those who kneel too fast or speak too little. You stand on the threshold while everyone pretends nothing is changing. But you see it. You feel it. One night, a noble slips you a scroll. No seal. Just a name written in charcoal and a place the eastern stairwell. Just before dawn, you burn the scroll without reading further. You know better than to show interest. If it's a test, you've passed. If it's real, they'll try again. 2 days later, a different noble offers you wine. Says nothing, just a look. You decline. That night, your food tastes faintly of mint. You don't eat. You never eat anything you didn't watch being made. The palace is eating itself from the inside. You keep your back to the wall. Your blade sharp, your words sparse. Elric notices your tension. They're scared, he whispers one morning. As the king mutters nonsense during a council session, you nod. Scared men are dangerous, he says. No, you reply. Ambitious men who smell weakness are worse. He doesn't ask what you mean. He's starting to learn. The queen grows more active again. You see her walking the halls just before midnight. Attendants trailing her like shadows. She doesn't speak to you, but you can feel her calculation like a knife measuring which side of the fruit to cut first. One evening, you're summoned. Not to her chamber, to the garden. Alone. She's standing there, hands clasped, staring into the dark hedges. You don't speak. It's near, she says. You wait. When it happens, you'll be needed. Not for him, for what comes after. She turns. Her eyes hold no fear, only fatigue. Do you understand? You nod once. She nods back. No more is said. You return to your post. A few nights later, the king doesn't rise for supper. The physician is summoned, then another. The whispers begin immediately. You're posted outside his door for the next 16 hours straight. No sleep, no food, just you, your sword, and the sounds of a kingdom deciding what it wants to become. You see courtiers pacing in patterns, advisors moving in twos, a sudden flood of letters sent at dawn, and behind the door, a man dying very slowly. You don't check on him. That's not your job. Your job is to wait, to protect the throne, even if the body on it is failing. You catch your reflection in the polished bronze wall plate. You look tired, older, not worn-honed. You adjust your belt, stand straighter. You won't be remembered in scrolls or songs. But when the crown falls, when it rolls from a dying hand, and the room pretends to be surprised, you will be there. Not to catch it, but to decide who reaches for it first. The death itself is quiet. No trumpets, no final decree, no thunder in the sky, just a curtain drawn a few inches tighter, and a physician who emerges pale with shaking hands, nodding once to a steward, who immediately begins walking faster than usual. You stand exactly where you've always stood, just outside the chamber door, and yet you feel the entire palace tilt on its foundation, as though the air has been holding its breath for weeks, and now dares to exhale. But you don't move. You don't blink. This is what you've trained for. Not war, not ceremony, not even protection. You've trained to be still while kingdoms rearrange themselves. Within minutes, everything changes. Runners dispatched, seals broken. The chapel bell rings once long and low. That sound means the king is dead. You expected it. but the sound still carves into you because it's not just the end of a man. It's the start of 1,000 decisions made in shadow. Already you hear feet rushing through corridors, whispers cutting the silence like paper. The crown hasn't even been lifted from his bedside, and already the throne has contenders. You aren't summoned. You don't need to be. You are summoned by absence. The Queen's guards are posted. The council room is lit at dawn. Foreign ambassadors are granted urgent audiences. But you remain by the door, because that door is the last place where the king was still the king. And someone must guard what little remains of him. You do. All day. All night. You don't eat. You sip water in silence and wipe your armor when no one is watching. People pass you, nodding, whispering, some sneering. You don't care. The physician's apprentice comes to collect the linens. He avoids your eyes. The court scribe brings parchment and leaves with a scroll he never lets go of. You memorize the weight of it in his hand. The way he walks too fast to be proud, too slow to be innocent. Ralph once said, real power never raises its voice. It just waits for silence. Now you understand. The palace has become a storm wrapped in velvet. That night, the queen calls you by name. Only your name. No title. No pleasantries. She simply says it and waits. You enter the solar and kneel. She tells you nothing about grief, nothing about loss. She speaks of order, stability, safety. There are those, she says, who will say the old king's time was glory and the new age is decline. She doesn't ask your opinion. She doesn't need to. Loyalty now, she continues, is not standing beside a man. It's standing beside a nation that must choose its future. You nod. She nods back. That is your oath. No blood, no blade, no witnesses. Just two people who know what silence costs. You are reassigned, not officially. The rotation chart says nothing, but from that moment on, you are always near her. Not too close, not like a servant or a pet, but close enough that every other noble sees it. You carry no new title, no crest, but you feel the shift. When the nobles look at you, their glances last half a second longer. When servants pass, they bow slightly deeper. Power is proximity. You are now the shadow of the person who truly decides, and you know it. The funeral takes place in the cathedral. The bells ring 13 times. The coffin is carried by 6 men who try to look solemn but sweat through their tunics. You walk behind, not because you were ordered to, but because that's where someone must be. The streets are lined with people who pretend to weep and people who pretend not to smile. You watch them both. You count how many wear black. You count how many whisper. You count how many stare too long at the queen. She doesn't cry. She doesn't tremble. She simply walks, steady and unreadable. The kind of woman who buries not just husbands, but entire eras. After the burial, the palace becomes something else, not broken rearranged. New banners, new rituals, new courtiers. Old allies vanish. New ones speak too much, too fast. You remain quiet. The queen now hosts councils at dusk. You stand near the door, armor dulled intentionally. Flash draws fire. Shadows survive. You watch names rise and fall. You see maps spread across tables like battlefields. You see letters stamped with new seals. And through it all, you do what you've always done. You remain. You're not promoted. You're not praised. But your orders now arrive with no intermediary. You are asked to deliver, to watch, to listen. Once, you are handed a letter and told, if it is opened, you'll know. It isn't. But you guard it like it contains the pulse of the realm. Historians will say the queen ruled with clarity and caution. You know she ruled with fear and precision. You watched her adjust the kingdom like a sword at the hip balanced, ready, never for display. One morning, you wake to news that a duke has abdicated his title. No one says why. You already know. He had been walking too near the queen, asking too many quiet questions. Another morning, the cook is replaced. She had once whispered something to Elric. He never repeated it, but he was reassigned anyway. You don't see him again. You don't ask. That's how you survive. Eventually, The palace becomes routine again, not peaceful, but predictable, which is the closest thing to peace this place will ever allow. You train, you walk, you wait. New guards arrive. Younger, louder. They think the queen's silence is emptiness. You know better. You say little. They learn in time. One of them disappears after making a joke about her hair. Another begins weeping during a night shift and asks to be reassigned. You simply continue. Because the palace doesn't remember those who shout. It remembers those who endure. Years pass. Your joints ache. Your armor weighs more than it used to. You speak less. You feel more. You don't miss war. You don't miss ceremony. You miss Ralph. You miss the version of yourself who once believed loyalty would be noticed. But even in that, you remain steady. Because you were never here for recognition. You were here to guard. And now you guard a different throne. A different silence. A different shape of danger. One night, in the upper corridor, the queen passes you, pauses, looks you over, still standing. She says, "It isn't praise. It isn't surprise. It's a simple observation, and it means everything." You nod. She nods. Then she disappears into the dark, and you return to your post, the same as ever, unchanged, unseen, and utterly essential. And now, the hall's quiet once more. The boots have stopped echoing. The banners no longer shift in the wind. Somewhere outside these walls, another world moves, children grow, kingdoms rise, traders argue over sacks of grain. But here, in this silent stretch of stone and shadow, you remain, steady, breathing, watching the last candle flicker before morning. You're older now. The armor creaks a little more when you move. The sword feels heavier, not in your hand, but in the memory it carries. You don't think about legacy. You don't imagine monuments or ballads or names carved into marble. That was never the point. You were never the king, never the hand, never even the whisper behind the throne. You were simply the one who stayed, the one who knew when to move and when to vanish, when to speak and when to become the wall. The palace is still, for now. The danger has passed, or perhaps only stepped outside for a moment to breathe. Either way, the weight in your shoulders finally softens. You close your eyes, just for a second, and in that second, nothing falls, nothing burns, no blade rises, only the slow hum of silence. You've earned it, so rest now. Let the halls keep themselves for a while. Let the night deepen without fear. No one will come for the king. No one will come for you. Because tonight, like so many nights before, you are here, and that is enough. Good night. Ghost of the wall. Sleep in steel. Dream in silence. You've done your duty. You may rest,